Every spring, she paints the same white fence, slow, careful strokes, as if covering the wood could also cover the years between them. She doesn't paint for beauty. She paints for hope. So when her children finally come down that old gravel road, the house will look alive enough to welcome them home. But every year, the paint dries, and the driveway stays empty. Her name is Evelyn Carter. She's 68, and this fence, it's the last conversation she still believes her family might answer. Every spring begins with the same ritual. The ladder scrapes the floor of the shed, the can rattles against the wheelbarrow, and Evelyn Carter stands in the doorway breathing in the damp air that smells like earth waking up. The shed is small, half tools, half museum. Everything inside belongs to another life. A broken rake that used to be her husband's favorite, a child-sized bike rusting under a tarp, and a tin of nails labeled "Fall Later." She smiles each year at that label. Later has been stretched thin these last 10 springs. She rolls the ladder out, steadying herself on the handle. Her hands are the color of paper now, translucent in sunlight. When she grips the wood, you can see the pulse flickering below the skin, proof that she's still here, still waiting for something that hasn't arrived. The fence runs the length of her yard, white pickets bordering tulips that bloom too early, too eager. Winter leaves behind stains of rust and mildew, small wounds on the boards that she alone tends to. She sets the paint can on the grass. The lid pops with that soft sigh of pressure released, and for a moment she closes her eyes. The smell is sharp, familiar, a smell that means renewal, disguise, and memory all at once. When she was younger, her husband would tease her about this habit. "You'll paint that fence to death, Evie," he'd say, and she'd laugh. "Better the fence than me." Now she repeats the line quietly, just to fill the space where his voice used to be. The first stroke of paint always feels ceremonial. She moves the brush slowly, careful not to drip on the flowers. White covers gray, new covers old. It's not about perfection. It's about pretending things can start over. Across the street, a school bus wheezes to a stop. Children spill out, backpacks bouncing, voices bright enough to sting. She waves to the driver out of habit. He nods politely, the way people do when they see someone who might be lonely but dignified. By mid-morning her shoulders ache. She rests the brush on the rim of the can and straightens up. The sunlight glints off the wet paint, dazzling, almost too bright. For an instant she imagines headlights turning into the drive. Rachel's silver SUV, maybe. Tom's truck. The fantasy is detailed enough to make her heart stutter. Then the road stays empty, and the only movement is a tumble of petals across the gravel. Evelyn exhales through her nose, half a sigh, half a laugh. "Got myself again," she mutters. She takes her lunch on the porch, half a sandwich, 1 apple, and tea gone lukewarm. The cup has a crack running down the handle. A small lightning bolt she traces with her thumb while she eats. It hasn't broken yet, and she likes that about it. Inside the house, every room hums with its own silence. In the hallway hangs a photo, 3 children on a swing set, her husband pushing from behind. The picture is slightly tilted. She keeps meaning to fix it but doesn't. A small rebellion against perfect symmetry. Perfect things leave too easily. She returns to the yard. The paint has thickened in the sun. It clings to the brush, slower now, heavier. She hums while she works, an old tune from church that she can't remember the words to, only the shape of the melody. By afternoon, her palms are spattered white. A neighbor's car door slams, and Mrs. Harper calls from across the hedge. "You're at it again. Evelyn, that fence doesn't need another coat." Evelyn smiles. "Maybe not, but I do." Mrs. Harper laughs and disappears inside. That single sentence lingers in the air long after she's gone. It's the closest Evelyn has come to telling the truth in weeks. When the day folds into evening, She rinses the brushes in a bucket until the water clouds gray. A robin hops along the fence line, testing the new paint with one cautious foot before flying off. Inside, she records the day in her small blue notebook. Fence half done. Weather good. No calls. Below that, in smaller handwriting, maybe Saturday. Then she sets the notebook beside the lamp and listens. Sometimes she hears cars passing, sometimes only wind through the trees. She pretends each sound is the beginning of a visit. Hope has rhythm if you listen kindly enough. At midnight, when sleep still won't come, she walks to the window. Moonlight spills across the driveway, silvering the gravel into something almost beautiful. She whispers to it like an old friend. "You'd tell me if they were coming, wouldn't you?" The night says nothing back, but she chooses to believe the quiet means yes. Sleep rarely comes easy anymore. When it does, it's filled with colors: white paint, green grass, blue sky that never clouds. But tonight, like most nights, the memories arrive first. She sees her husband, William, standing exactly where she stands now, a brush in his hand. The year was 1986. The children were small, chasing bubbles across the yard. The fence was new then, fresh cedar, the smell sweet and sharp. "We'll keep it bright," William had said, "so they'll always see home from the road." He'd winked, and she'd laughed because everything was still easy to believe back then. Evelyn closes her eyes. She can still hear their laughter. Rachel shouting that she'd painted her own name on one of the planks. Tom trying to scrub it off with a rag too big for his hand. The fence had been their family canvas, each stroke a mark of being together. After William's passing, the fence lost its shine first. Then the laughter. Then the visits. It started small. Rachel missing Easter one year because of Wyke. Then Tom forgetting her birthday but sending flowers through a delivery app. Small reasons, small excuses, until small turned into habit. She never blamed them, not out loud. She told herself they were busy, building their own lives, the same life she and William had worked so hard to give them. But in the quiet, she blamed herself. Maybe she hadn't taught them how to stay. When the first spring without William arrived, Evelyn stood in the yard and stared at the dull boards. The house looked tired, and so did she. She went to the shed, found a half-used can, and began painting. It wasn't about upkeep. It was about defiance, against loneliness, against fading. If she kept the place bright, she thought, someone might remember to come home. Every year since then, the ritual continued. Neighbors changed, seasons turned, but the brush never rested. Now, as morning light slides across her room, she wakes to the smell of fresh paint lingering on her hands. It's her favorite perfume, even if the world doesn't understand why. She sits at the edge of the bed, stretches her back, and whispers to the photograph on her nightstand. "Another day, Will. Another coat." The photograph doesn't answer, but his smile, frozen and kind, makes it feel like permission. In the kitchen, she hums while making breakfast. She pours 2 cups of coffee out of habit. One goes cold beside the other, a small ceremony of love that refuses to die. She carries her own cup outside. The air is crisp, and sunlight filters through the apple tree. Drops of dew on the fence catch light, tiny mirrors of a life still shining. Across the street, Mrs. Harper's grandson pedals by on a bike with a crooked wheel. He waves. She waves back and calls, "Tell your grandmother the pie tin's on the porch." He grins and rides off. It's a simple exchange, but it keeps her tethered to the world. Connections don't always need to be grand. Sometimes they are just a pie tin and a smile. Evelyn dips her brush again. Paint drips onto her shoe. She doesn't notice. With each stroke, she speaks softly to the boards. "You and me, we keep the promise. They'll come one day. You'll see." The mail truck passes. It slows, hesitates, then moves on. No envelope today. She watches until the red tail lights vanish. Then she sets the brush down, takes a deep breath, and whispers, "Maybe tomorrow." When the sun begins to dip, she cleans up slowly, careful not to waste a drop. She stores the can in the shed, wipes her hands on the same old rag, and sits on the porch steps watching the light turn orange. The fence glows. It almost looks alive again. A car drives past, too fast to stop. For a heartbeat, she sees her reflection in the windshield and wonders if the driver saw her too. Then the road is empty, as always. She folds her hands, and in the stillness, the first cool wind of evening slides across her cheek. It feels like a touch she's been waiting for. "One more coat tomorrow," she says softly. "Just one more." By the third day of painting, the sun had changed color. It was no longer the pale gold of early spring. It had ripened into something warmer, the kind that rests gently on skin. Evelyn could feel it along her shoulders, a weight that wasn't unpleasant, only real. She was crouched near the gate when a voice called across the hedge. "You're gonna finish the whole thing by yourself again, Mrs. Carter." It was Noah, the Harper's grandson, the boy with the crooked-wheeled bike. 15, maybe 16, too old to shout and too young to hide curiosity. He leaned on the handlebars, a streak of sunlight tangled in his hair. Evelyn smiled without looking up. "Someone has to keep this fence from giving up on me. You ever think of hiring help?" "I did once," she said, tapping the brush against the can. "But he went and married me instead." Noah laughed, uncertain if he was allowed to. She liked that sound, youth finding its way through politeness. He watched her work for a while, the wheel of his bike spinning lazily. "My mom says you've been painting that fence every year since before I was born." "Your mom's right," Evelyn answered. "That means she's been paying attention, which is more than I can say for my own kids." The boy's face softened. He looked as though he wanted to ask something but changed his mind. "Well, it looks good," he said finally. "Thank you, sweetheart. Come back tomorrow and tell me if it still looks good after another coat." After he left, she kept painting, but her rhythm had changed. It felt lighter now, like each stroke carried a story that might one day be repeated. For the first time in a long while, she imagined someone telling her story out loud, not as gossip, but as remembrance. That afternoon, Mrs. Harper herself appeared at the gate, a basket balanced on one hip. "Brought you some scones," she said. "Noah told me you've been at it again." Evelyn wiped her hands and accepted the basket. "Bless you. I was starting to think my oven forgot how to bake." Mrs. Harper chuckled. "It's a nice fence. My husband says it's the only thing in this street that never looks tired. Maybe because it doesn't get time to." The two women stood there in companionable silence, listening to birds quarrel in the maple tree. Finally, Mrs. Harper asked the question people always asked, the one they tried to hide behind small talk. "Do your kids ever visit?" Evelyn smiled, careful and practiced. "Now and then. Life's busy, you know." Mrs. Harper nodded politely, pretending to believe it. "Well, you let me know if you ever need a hand with that paint. Noah's strong." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "I see him ride by. He reminds me of my Tom at that age, always in a hurry, never sure where to." When her neighbor left, Evelyn carried the scones inside. The kitchen filled with the scent of butter and cinnamon, and for a few minutes she imagined her children arriving that evening, coffee cups clinking, laughter spilling into corners that hadn't heard it in years. She set 2 scones on a plate and left them by the phone, just in case. That evening the wind changed direction. The smell of rain drifted in. Evelyn covered the paint can, tied down the torp, and sat on the porch watching the clouds gather. When lightning flickered in the distance, she whispered, "Don't you dare ruin my fence tonight." But rain has its own plans. Within minutes, It came in sheets, drumming against the roof. She could see the first thin rivulets tracing down the new paint, turning white into gray tears. She stood under the porch light, helpless but calm. "It's all right," she murmured. "We'll fix it tomorrow." Inside, she wrote in her blue notebook, "Rain today. Fence will need patience." Then she added, "Talk to Noah. Good kid." Before bed, she looked out one last time. The street lights blurred through the downpour. The driveway shimmered like glass. Somewhere beyond that shimmer, she imagined car headlights bending toward her house. Her heart leapt, then stilled. No one was coming in this weather. She whispered into the dark, "Maybe next spring." And yet, beneath the sadness, something different stirred. A quiet awareness that she wasn't entirely invisible. Someone had noticed. Someone had asked. And sometimes that's all it takes for the waiting to hurt a little less. By dawn, the storm had gone, leaving the air washed clean and heavy with the scent of wet earth. Evelyn opened the door before the kettle finished boiling. Her first thought wasn't for breakfast or the chill, it was for the fence. Outside, the world glimmered. Puddles caught the weak sunlight like mirrors, and the grass bent beneath 1,000 drops. She slipped her shoes on, still damp from yesterday, and stepped into the yard. The fence stood waiting. Rain had streaked the fresh white paint into rivers of pale gray. In some places the wood showed through. In others the color had bubbled and peeled. It looked wounded, but not ruined. She touched one board, and the paint came away on her fingertip, soft, fragile, like the memory of something once strong. "You held on better than I thought," she murmured. A robin fluttered to the mailbox, shaking droplets from its feathers. She took that as an answer. She fetched the rag from the porch, wiped the boards gently, and began again. No brush this time, just her hands smoothing what could be saved. It wasn't about perfection. It was about conversation. The fence had become the only thing that still listened. While she worked, the sound of tires crunched on the road. She turned instinctively, her heart jumping the way it always did at that sound, only to see the mail truck stopping at the Harper's house. Her pulse slowed. The familiar ache settled back in. Still, she waited until the truck moved on, just in case it decided to stop for her too. It didn't. Back inside, she brewed fresh tea, poured a cup, and carried it to the window. Steam fogged the glass, and through it she could see her reflection. Tired eyes, white streaks of paint on her cheek. And behind her, the fence shining under the new sun. For a long time she watched that brightness. She thought of William, of their children, of the years that used to overflow with noise. The silence now wasn't cruel. It was just big. Big enough to hold everything she hadn't said. She set the cup down, opened her blue notebook, and wrote, "Fence survived the storm. So did I." Then she added, in smaller letters, "No letter yet." By afternoon, the clouds had drifted west. Evelyn took her chair onto the porch and sat with a blanket across her knees. The air smelled of lilac again. Noah passed on his bike, waving. She raised her hand in return. He called out, "Fence looks good, Mrs. Carter." She laughed. "Tell that to the rain." He grinned and rode off, splashing through a puddle. The sound of his laughter trailed behind him, and for a moment she let herself believe it belonged to one of her own children. Evening came soft and gold. Evelyn lit the porch light early, the way she always did, a beacon for anyone who might still come home late. She stood at the edge of the steps, looked down the long, empty driveway, and whispered, "Still here, still waiting." The wind carried the words away, perhaps down the road, perhaps know why. Either way, she felt lighter for having said them. She turned back toward the house, and in that moment the camera of memory would catch her, the woman in the doorway, a figure framed by light, paint on her hands, hope in her eyes. That image would linger, quiet and unfinished, as the first part of her story closed and the next began. The part where someone finally asks the questions she's never been asked. The next day began with sunlight so bright it looked almost new. It slid through the curtains, pooling on the kitchen floor. And for once the house didn't feel like a museum. Evelyn moved slowly, a rhythm she had perfected. Make the bed, open the windows, feed the sparrows. She hummed without realizing. A fragment of an old song that no one remembered but her. When she stepped outside, the world smelled of grass and paint, two of her favorite things. The fence, patched and proud after the storm, gleamed beneath the light like it was trying to please her. Halfway down the street, Mrs. Harper was watering her hydrangeas. She looked up and waved the nozzle. "Morning, Evelyn." Fence still standing. "I see." "Barely," Evelyn called back. We both took a beating. Mrs. Harper crossed the street, the hose still running behind her, and leaned on the gate the way old friends do when they've been meaning to talk. "Mind if I ask you something?" she said. Evelyn smiled. "You just did. You ever think of going to visit them instead of waiting here?" The question landed softly, but it rippled through Evelyn like the smallest stone dropped in deep water. She looked toward the road, pretending to think. "I thought about it once," she said finally, "packed a bag and everything. And turned out the drive was easier than the arrival." Mrs. Harper studied her for a long second, then reached out and touched her arm. "You're stronger than you think." That's what people say when they don't know what else to say. Noah appeared again, bike squeaking. "Grandma, you left the hose on." "Well, it's watering the street now," she said. "Come tell Mrs. Carter hello." The boy rolled closer, his shoes splashing through a puddle. "Hey, Mrs. Carter. Fence looks even better today. Rain's good for something, isn't it?" He grinned. "My art teacher says paint and rain don't mix." "Then your art teacher's never been lonely," she said, half smiling. Noah blinked, unsure what she meant, but his eyes, bright and honest, stayed on her a little longer than before. Later, after they'd gone, Evelyn sat on the porch steps with her tea and thought about that question, why she never went to them. The answer was simple and heavy. She wanted to be remembered, not pitied. If she showed up at their door, she'd become the problem to be managed, the calendar adjustment, the obligation. Here, at least, she could still be love waiting to happen, not guilt arriving unannounced. She whispered to the fence, "You understand, don't you? Way prettier from a distance." A delivery van rolled down the street and stopped in front of the Harpers. Evelyn glanced at it. For a moment, the shape of the driver in the windshield looked like her son Tom. She felt that quick, familiar tightening in her chest. But when the man stepped out, he was a stranger. She let out a quiet laugh that turned into a sigh. "One day I'll stop mistaking everyone for them," she said. "Just not yet." As the day wore on, neighbors came and went, tiny interruptions in the long conversation she had with herself. Someone asked for directions, another for garden tips. Each question was an invitation to exist. And Evelyn, who had spent years speaking mostly to fences and photographs, found herself grateful for every one of them. At sunset she wrote in her notebook, "Visitors, Mrs. H, Noah, delivery man, not Tom." Fence survived another day. Then she added, "People keep asking why I wait. Maybe tomorrow I'll know how to answer." She closed the book, looked once more down the long, empty driveway, and whispered, "Good night, whoever you are tonight." The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed hesitant, as if it didn't want to interrupt her thoughts. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, the small lamp throwing a circle of warm light across the wood. Outside, the fence gleamed faintly under the moon, a ghostly line between hope and history. She sipped her tea. It had gone cold long ago. That's when she noticed the box. It lived on the top shelf of the cupboard, tucked behind a stack of dishes she never used anymore. The box was worn, corners soft, lid slightly warped from years of being opened and closed but never emptied. She pulled it down carefully, the way one handles something sacred and dangerous all at once. Inside lay a bundle of envelopes, some yellowed with age, some still white and crisp, each one addressed in her own neat handwriting. Rachel Carter, Thomas Carter, different cities, same silence. Each envelope had a date in the corner, each one a year she'd painted the fence. She hadn't realized that until now. Evelyn touched the top letter, traced her own looping handwriting. It felt like touching the skin of a wound that had never fully healed. She opened the first one. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. "Dear Rachel," it began. "Your father would have been proud of the way you handled yourself at the bank. I saw your promotion online. I know you're busy, but if you find a moment, your old room is just the way you left it. I dust it every week, silly as that sounds." She smiled bitterly. It had been 7 years since she'd written that. 7 years since Rachel's last visit. The next letter was to Tom. "Dear Tom, I fixed the fence again. Remember when you used to help me paint? You'd always end up with more white on your jeans than on the boards. I kept one of those jeans, you know, folded in the linen closet, like a flag for a country that doesn't exist anymore." Her voice broke halfway through the sentence, but she kept reading. "I'm proud of you, son, even when you don't call, even when I don't understand your world anymore. I hope the city's kind to you." She folded the letter back slowly, smoothing the creases with her palm. There were dozens more. Letters for birthdays missed, holidays alone, moments that had no audience but her. She'd written to fill the space where their voices should have been. Some were long, others only a few lines. "I made your favorite pie today. The lilacs bloomed early again. The fence is holding up. I miss you, but I'll wait." Evelyn stacked the letters neatly, then sat staring at them for a long time. What had stopped her from sending them? Pride? Fear? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe it was because sending them would have meant admitting she expected an answer. An expectation, she'd learned, was the cruelest kind of hope. She placed the letters back in the box, but before closing it, she added one more, fresh ink, trembling handwriting. "Dear Rachel, dear Tom, the fence is white again. The paint's holding. I'm not. Love, Mom." She set the box on the table beside her teacup. The room felt smaller, but lighter, too, like she'd opened a window she hadn't known was locked. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the window. For a heartbeat, she imagined it slowing down, turning into the driveway. But it didn't. It never did. Still, she whispered toward the sound. "You'll come when you're ready. And until then, I'll keep painting." She blew out the lamp, leaving the box in the glow of the moonlight, a small monument to all the words a mother never gets to say out loud. The rain came earlier than expected that week. Not a drizzle, not the polite sort of spring rain that dances on petals, but a heavy, deliberate kind that sounded like the sky was trying to confess something. By the time Evelyn noticed the dark edge of clouds rolling over the hills, the first drops were already tapping the window, soft, warning taps that carried the smell of wet dust and distance. She stood at the sink, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea, watching the wind bend the lilac bushes until they looked like they were bowing to the storm. The fence shone white and fragile against the gray world, still new, still hopeful. A promise too clean to survive what was coming. Evelyn set the cup down, pulled on her raincoat, and stepped outside just as the rain began to fall in earnest. The drops were cold. They hit her face like reminders. One for every letter she never sent. One for every promise that went unkept. She walked toward the fence, the ground soft under her shoes, and touched the top board with the tips of her fingers. Already the water was running down the planks, carrying with it small threads of white paint, leaving streaks like tears on a pale face. "Hold on," she whispered to it. "You've been through worse." But even as she said it, she felt the same plea building in her chest, directed not at the wood, but at herself. She went to the shed, pulled out an old tarp, and tried to fasten it over the fresh paint. The wind fought her every movement, lifting the plastic, slapping it against her arms. The rain grew heavier. Her hair clung to her forehead, her breath coming in sharp bursts of cold. But she kept working, her hands trembling from effort, from memory, from everything she refused to name. A flash of lightning tore across the sky, briefly lighting the fence in silver light. For a second, it looked alive again. Then the thunder followed, a deep, rolling sound that seemed to shake the earth itself. Evelyn flinched but didn't move. She stood there in the storm, her raincoat soaked through, watching the water undo her work. She could almost hear her husband's voice through the wind. "Evie, get inside. It's just paint." And she answered out loud, her voice breaking between sob and laughter. "It's not just paint. Well, it's all I have left to fix." For a long moment, she let the rain pour over her. It washed the salt of tears from her cheeks, the white from her hands, and something even heavier from her heart. When she finally turned back toward the porch, the house looked blurred through the downpour, a shadow of warmth behind a curtain of water. She climbed the steps slowly, her knees stiff, and sat on the top stair. Rain dripped from the brim of her coat onto the wooden boards below. She watched the storm tear at her flowers, flattening them into the mud, and thought, that's what waiting does too. Hours passed. The storm moved east, and in its wake came silence, that strange, echoing quiet that always follows chaos. The moon broke through the clouds at last, its light falling across the yard, picking out the streaks of paint, the fallen petals, the tired woman sitting motionless in the glow. Evelyn looked at the fence, ruined again, but still standing, and she whispered, "We'll start over tomorrow." Inside, she changed into dry clothes, set a towel by the door for her shoes, and wrote a single line in her blue notebook. "Fence damaged. Hot, slightly less so." When she turned off the lamp, she thought she saw something through the window, headlights slowing near her driveway. But by the time she reached the curtain, the road was empty again. Only the faint echo of tires in the distance. Only the rain, whispering good night. The storm had passed, but its smell still clung to everything. The curtains, the grass, even her hair. It was the scent of things washed clean, though not necessarily renewed. Evelyn woke later than usual that morning. The light was strange, that soft, gray kind that makes the world feel half asleep. She moved slowly, each step echoing through the quiet house. The fence would have to wait today. So would the laundry. Her bones ached the way old wood creaks in damp weather. She brewed her tea, sat at the table with her notebook, and stared at the last line she'd written the night before. "Fence damaged. Hot, slightly less so." She smiled faintly. Maybe she still had her sense of humor, thin as it was. Then the phone rang. It startled her, the sound slicing through the stillness so sharply that the cup trembled in her hands. It had been months since that ring meant anything but telemarketers, wrong numbers, or silence that disconnected before she could say hello. She reached for it slowly, like it might disappear if she moved too quickly. "Hello." There was a pause, a small, breath-filled pause that made her heart stutter. Then a voice she knew too well. "Mom." The world stopped moving for a moment. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt her knees weaken as she sank into the chair. Tom. Yeah, it's me. She pressed the receiver to her ear as if she could pull him through the line. For a second, everything she'd rehearsed, all the speeches she'd built during years of waiting, vanished. It's been a while, she managed. Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. Things got busy. She wanted to tell him busy was not a word that belonged between family. She wanted to ask him if he'd forgotten what her voice sounded like. Instead, she said, I'm glad you called. Another pause. The kind of pause that fills a lifetime. Listen, he began. I wanted to talk to you about the house. The words hit her chest like cold rain. The house? Yeah, Rachel and I were thinking, maybe it's too much for you to manage alone now. You could come stay with her for a while. Or sell it even. We'd help handle everything. Sell it. The words sat there between them, ugly and echoing. She looked through the window at the fence, still standing, streaked and imperfect. The one thing she had rebuilt over and over. She imagined it gone. The yard flattened. The driveway empty for good. That's kind of you, she said quietly. But I'm not ready to give up on it yet. Mom, it's just a house. No, she whispered. It's not. Her voice cracked on the edge of the sentence, a splinter of pain too small for him to notice. But she heard it. Tom sighed. Look, I didn't mean to upset you. I just think it might be easier. For who? Silence. Then, I'll come by next month, maybe. We'll talk then. I have to run. Meeting's about to start. Evelyn smiled, though he couldn't see it. Of course, dear. Don't let me keep you. Love you, Mom. Love you too, she said, and meant it more than he could imagine. She stayed there for a long time, hand still on the receiver, the hum of the disconnected line filling the room like distant thunder. Then she set it down gently, as if afraid to break what little connection she still had. Outside, the clouds began to lift. The sun broke through, lighting the wet boards of the fence until they shimmered like glass. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the light play across the paint. She didn't cry. There were no tears left for this kind of ache. Instead, she whispered to the quiet. He called about the house. Will. But he called. In her blue notebook she wrote, Tom called today, asked about the house. I said no. Then after a pause, he said love you. She closed the notebook and pressed her hand over it, as if holding onto the heartbeat of a memory. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Not complete, but seen. She looked out at the fence, the sun drying the last of the rain from its boards, and said softly, We'll keep painting, won't we? It took 3 weeks for the visit to happen. 3 weeks of marking days in her blue notebook. 3 weeks of polishing the silverware, ironing the curtains, and buying ingredients she hadn't used in years. Hope is strange that way. Even when it disappoints, it still keeps you busy. Evelyn cleaned every corner of the house. She dusted the mantel, wiped the photo frames until they gleamed. She even rearranged the furniture, the way she used to when she expected guests back when life was louder. She baked a pie, apple and cinnamon, Tom's favorite, and put out a jar of lilacs by the window. The air smelled of sugar and spring, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty. It felt ready. She wore her blue cardigan, the one her husband used to say brought out her eyes, and waited by the window, watching for headlights at the end of the long gravel road. Hours passed. Afternoon light shifted to gold. The pie cooled on the counter. The silence began to stretch. Then, just as she was about to turn off the porch light, she heard it, the low hum of an engine, the slow crunch of tires on gravel. Her heart lifted, her hands pressed against the glass like a child's. A car turned into the driveway, its headlights slicing through the dusk. "Oh, Will," she whispered. "They came." She hurried to the door, straightened her cardigan, and pulled it open before the car even stopped. But when the door swung wide, the first person she saw wasn't Tom. It was a young woman, dark hair, a serious face, carrying a clipboard and a sympathetic smile. Behind her, a man in uniform stepped out, a realtor's badge clipped to his shirt pocket. "Mrs. Carter," the woman said, "I'm Emma from Valley Realty. Your son asked us to come take a few photos of the property. He said you were expecting us." Evelyn's smile froze halfway. "Photos?" The woman nodded. "Yes, just a few shots for the listing. He mentioned you were considering selling." Evelyn's hand found the edge of the doorframe. She felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. "Oh," she managed. "Yes, of course." She forced a small laugh. "You'll want to see the fence, then. It's freshly painted." The woman smiled politely, not noticing the tremor in Evelyn's voice. They moved around the yard, snapping pictures. The porch, the flowers, the fence that had cost her 10 springs of devotion. Evelyn stood on the steps, watching in silence. The camera clicked like a heartbeat she couldn't control. Each flash felt like another piece of her life being captured and taken away. When they were done, the young woman handed her a card. "Your son said he'll follow up next week, just to confirm everything. You have a lovely home, Mrs. Carter." "Yes," Evelyn said. "It's been lovely for a long time." They left as politely as they came. Their car reversed down the driveway, its red taillights fading into the growing dark. And then, once again, the driveway was empty. Inside, the pie sat untouched on the counter. The air had cooled. The lilacs had begun to droop. Evelyn sat at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply breathed. After a while, she took her notebook and wrote. The visit came, just not from them. Then, beneath it, she added, "Fence looks nice in the photos, though." When she finally rose, she went to the window and looked out at the driveway, wet with new rain, shining under the porch light like a mirror reflecting absence. She whispered, "You sent them to take my home, Tom, but you forgot it's already taken by memory." She turned off the light, and in the dark reflection of the glass, she saw herself, older, lonelier, but still there, still painting, still waiting. The next morning, the light was pale and tender, the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. It crept across Evelyn's floorboards, climbed the walls, and found her sitting at the edge of her bed with her robe wrapped tight. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't dreamed of arrivals or headlights. Just quiet. She realized, with mild surprise, that quiet could be kind. The house smelled of apples and varnish, yesterday's pie still cooling on the counter, the fence's scent drifting in through the window. It was strange how memory hid in smells. Her husband's cologne, Tom's aftershave, Rachel's perfume that always lingered too long in the hallway. All of them seemed present, woven invisibly into the morning. She brewed her tea, hands steady despite the tremor that came with age and weather. When she set the cup down, the sound of porcelain on wood felt louder than usual. She listened to it as if it were an announcement. "You're still here." Outside, the fence glimmered, still white even after the realtor's photographs, after the storm, after everything. For 10 years it had been her measure of time. Now, looking at it through the kitchen window, she wondered if the fence had actually been measuring her instead. Evelyn stepped onto the porch. The air carried a hint of lilac and wet earth. Each breath was cool enough to make her chest ache. She ran her hand along the rail where raindrops still clung like beads of glass. "You're stubborn," she whispered to the boards. "So am I." She smiled, an honest smile, small but real, and sank into the old wicker chair that creaked beneath her. The creak was comforting. It sounded like life answering back. For a long while she simply sat there, cup in hand, watching the world perform its ordinary miracles. Two sparrows wrestled in the dirt. A mail truck passed without stopping. The neighbor's wind chime argued softly with the breeze. Each sound landed differently today. None of them hurt. The memory of the realtor's car lingered only as an image now, the glint of chrome, the quick apology in the woman's eyes. It no longer burned. It simply existed, like a photograph you keep because it's part of the story. She realized she hadn't checked the driveway since dawn. Normally she would have. It had become reflex. But this morning she didn't need to. Whatever emptiness waited out there no longer had power over her. She looked down at her hands. They were rougher than she remembered, knuckles marked by years of paint and weather. She rubbed them gently together and thought, these hands built something lasting, even if nobody noticed. Her thoughts wandered to William. If he were alive, he would have told her to stop fussing, to rest, to travel, maybe even to sell the house and start over somewhere warm. But she would have laughed and said, home isn't a place, Will, it's a promise. And promises, once painted, were meant to stay bright. A car door slammed in the distance, Mrs. Harper calling to Noah. Evelyn listened to their voices, the casual rhythm of ordinary family life, and instead of envy, she felt something gentler, gratitude that such sounds still existed near her. She whispered, keep that noise going for me, world. I like hearing it. Inside, the phone sat silent on its cradle. It no longer felt like an accusation. It was just an object again, waiting for a reason to ring. And maybe, she thought, she didn't need it to. The tea cooled in her cup, but she kept holding it anyway, the warmth grounding her in the present. The present, she realized, had become enough. Later, she walked down to the mailbox. It was, as expected, empty except for a grocery flyer. Still, she opened it, felt the hinge squeak, and smiled at the noise. Even metal liked to be remembered. On her way back, she stopped by the fence. The boards were smooth beneath her palm, sunlight sliding across their surface in ripples. She thought about all the years she had begged this fence to look alive so her children might come home. And now, standing there, she understood the truth that had taken a decade to reveal itself. The fence had never been a message for them. It had been a mirror for her, proof that she could still create beauty even when no one was watching. The realization came quietly, like a sigh leaving the body after holding too much. She wasn't angry anymore. Not at them, not at time, not at herself. She was just tired of letting love be measured by return visits. She looked toward the horizon, where the road vanished into shimmering heat, and said softly, maybe they needed to go. Maybe I needed to stay. A robin landed on the fence then, small, weightless, alive. It tilted its head at her, curious, as if to ask, what now? Evelyn smiled at the question. Now, she said aloud, I rest. The day settled into that comfortable stillness between noon and evening, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. Evelyn sat on the porch, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't read a word. The hum of a lawn mower somewhere down the street mixed with the distant laughter of children. For years those sounds had felt like reminders of everything she'd lost. Today they sounded like proof that life kept moving, and that was strangely comforting. She looked up when she heard bicycle wheels crunching gravel. Noah again. Backpack half unzipped, a baseball glove dangling from the side. He slowed near the gate. You ever take a break, Mrs. Carter? Only when I forget what I'm working on, she said, closing the book. He leaned the bike against the fence and climbed the steps without waiting for an invitation. He'd stopped asking weeks ago. That, too, felt like progress. Grandma says you used to be a teacher, he said, settling on the top step. She said you were the mean kind, strict. Evelyn laughed. Strict, yes. Mean, only to the ones who thought grammar was optional. Noah grinned. So what did you teach? English. Stories. How to listen, mostly. He looked surprised. Listen, but teachers talk all the time. Good ones don't, she said. They wait until the noise quiets down, and then they hear what the kids aren't saying. Noah nodded, pretending to understand, though she could see he was still carrying more questions than answers. He pulled a folded paper from his backpack. I wrote this for English class, he said. It's about something you wait for. I figured you'd get it. She took the page carefully, the way she'd once handled essays from 30 restless students. His handwriting was crooked but earnest. She read aloud, voice slow, respectful. I wait for my dad to come to my baseball games. He says he will, but he's busy. Mom says he cares even when he can't come. Sometimes I think caring should show up. She stopped reading. The air between them felt suddenly fragile. That's beautiful, Noah. It's not really. It's just true. She handed the paper back. Truth usually is beautiful, even when it hurts. He tucked the page away, embarrassed by his own honesty. Grandma says you've got a lot of stories. You should write one about this fence. Oh, I already have, she said. It just isn't on paper. Then how will anyone read it? Evelyn smiled. They don't need to. Some stories are meant to be seen. He looked out at the whiteboards, sunlight flashing between them. I think I get it. You will, she said softly. One day. Mrs. Harper's voice floated from across the yard. Noah, dinner. Coming, he shouted, then turned to Evelyn. Can I come by tomorrow? I'll help with whatever you're doing. Tomorrow's laundry day, she said. You sure you're ready for that kind of danger? He laughed. Maybe I'll bring cookies instead. She watched him ride off, the bicycle wobbling, the evening light catching his hair like a small flame. When the sound faded, she whispered to the air, Thank you, whoever sent that boy my way. She stayed outside until dusk, the porch light blooming yellow around her. The world smelled of cut grass and rain returning somewhere far off. She felt a strange ache, not sadness, not loneliness, something gentler, like gratitude finally finding its place. In that moment she realized she had begun to teach again, just in a quieter classroom. Later, as she wrote in her blue notebook, she didn't record weather or chores this time. She wrote a single line. Today I listened, and the world answered. By nightfall, the world had folded itself into hush. The air held that faint sweetness that always follows a long, warm day. Evelyn left the porch light on out of habit, but tonight it felt less like a beacon and more like a lullaby for the house. She walked slowly through each room, touching things she used to hurry past. The curve of the banister, the dent on the hallway wall where Tom had crashed his toy truck, the faint ring on the coffee table where Rachel once spilled lemonade and laughed until she cried. Every mark, every scar of the home had turned from ache to evidence. They were here once. They were loved. In the kitchen, the pie was still on the counter. She cut a small slice, wrapped it carefully, and placed it in the freezer. For the next visitor, she murmured. Then, after a pause, added, even if it's just me. She poured herself one last cup of tea and carried it to her desk by the window. The blue notebook waited there beside the box of letters. Moonlight spilled across the pages like slow water. She opened to a clean sheet. The pen hovered, uncertain. Then the words began to arrive, quiet, deliberate, steady as breath. Dear Rachel, dear Tom, it's late, and I've been thinking. For a long time I believed love meant waiting, keeping the light on, the fence white, the door unlocked. But tonight I see that love can also mean letting you go without bitterness. I don't need you to come home to prove you care. I just need to remember that I did. She wrote for a while longer, not pleading this time, not explaining, just recording the truth of a heart finally at peace with its own echo. When she finished, she folded the page and slipped it into the box with the others. Then she whispered, That's the last one. Her hands lingered on the lid before closing it. The motion felt like sealing a chapter, not a wound. She carried the box to the closet, set it gently on the shelf above her coats. No ceremony, no tears, just quiet finality. Back at the window, the driveway stretched under moonlight, silver and still. She didn't search it for headlights. She just admired how peaceful emptiness could look when you stopped calling it loneliness. Her reflection in the glass surprised her. Eyes softer, shoulders lighter. A woman who looked less like someone waiting and more like someone arriving. "I found you again," she told the reflection, smiling faintly. Before going to bed, she stepped out to the porch one last time. The fence shone pale in the starlight, its lines steady and sure. She rested a hand on the nearest board and whispered, "You did well, old friend. Tomorrow we'll rest." The night answered with the sound of a breeze slipping through the trees, a sound that felt almost like approval. She turned off the porch light, leaving the yard bathed only in moonlight. The house exhaled, and for the first time in years, so did she. Morning came like a whisper. No alarms, no letters, no promises, just the steady hum of another spring beginning. Evelyn stood in the doorway, the air crisp and bright around her. On the porch sat a single can of paint, half used from last year, its lid flecked with rust. She smiled at it the way one greets an old friend who always keeps their appointments. "All right," she said softly. "One last coat." The brush felt lighter in her hand this time. Each stroke spread easily across the boards, clean and calm. She didn't rush. She didn't check the road. The act itself was enough: color, motion, silence working together. When the sun reached the fence line, the white glowed almost gold. She stepped back, wiping her palms on her apron. It was perfect, and she didn't need anyone else to see it. She walked to the mailbox and slipped inside a single envelope. It held the letter she'd written the night before. Not addressed, not stamped, just signed "Love, Mom." If the wind wanted to carry it, it could. If not, that was fine too. Back on the porch, she poured a second cup of tea and set it on the small table beside her chair. Steam rose into the cool morning air. For a long while she sat in silence, watching sunlight crawl across the empty driveway. It wasn't sadness she felt, it was fullness, the kind that comes when you realize nothing is missing except the need for more. She opened her blue notebook for the final time. On the last page she wrote, "Fence finished. Light steady. I am home." Then she closed it gently, as if tucking a child into bed. The camera of the story would linger here, on the woman, the fence, the 2 cups of tea cooling side by side. A portrait of peace that took a lifetime to paint. And as the scene fades, Evelyn's voice turns outward, toward the listener, toward anyone who's ever waited too long for someone else to come home. "Maybe you've been waiting to," she says softly, "for a call, a letter, a word that never arrived. But listen, sometimes the answer isn't coming from the road. Sometimes it's waiting inside your own quiet. Tell me, have you ever held on to something long after it stopped holding you? What was your fence, the thing you kept painting, hoping it would bring someone back?" She pauses, voice gentle, kind. Share it in the comments below, because your story might help someone else lay theirs down. You've been listening to Hidden Feelings, where the quietest stories remind us that love doesn't end. It simply changes its home.